Hello, and welcome to The Nature Connection Science, Wildlife, and Environment Radio with your hosts, Lisa and Nancy.
You may think that just because people have built giant cities, invented cars, and even pop-up toasters and put a person on the moon, that we're different from other living things like bats and bees and birds. Well, apparently we got something to just recheck that. And that's what Christopher Lloyd shows us in his brand new book. It's called Humanimal, Incredible Ways Animals Are Just Like Us. And Chris has several books in print, including 2 bestsellers. One is what happened? Oh my gosh, I can't even pronounce it. What on earth happened? And the other one, Absolutely Everything. And he was on our show back in spring with Absolutely Everything, a history of Earth, dinosaurs, rulers, robots, and other things too numerous to mention. It's a fantastic book, and we're so excited to have him back on Big Blend Radio's Nature Connection show today to talk about Humanimal, because his books are really fabulous. The illustrations get you in there, and they really open your eyes to other worlds and information that we just don't always see. I encourage you to go to his website, whatonearthbooks.com. Of course, Amazon, all those great things too. But welcome back, Chris. How are you?
I'm very well, Lisa, and it's lovely to be back. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, Nancy and I are super excited because we heard that you just came back from our hometown, our once home country of South Africa, and you got to play with penguins. And we're jealous.
It was I know, you should be. I tell you, it was amazing. And it was a very special moment for my wife and I, because we were there with our eldest daughter, Matilda,
Right.
who she's the one who got bored at school when she was 7 or 8. And we home educated for a few years after that, because we discovered that the best way for her to learn was through what she was interested in, not by listening to us telling her what she needed to know. And she was interested in penguins. And so we had so much fun doing projects about Antarctica and about penguins and things. But for the first time ever, just 2 days ago, we were with her. She's now 24. And we were with her in Cape Town, and we went to see penguins in their natural habitat, not at a zoo or anything else like that, at Boulders Beach. And there were thousands of them, and we get so close to them, and it was just an amazing experience. They're just amazing. She said it was the best day of her life. I mean, how cool is that?
That's way cool.
And to see them in a natural habitat, and versus a zoo is a night and day difference. And because
For sure.
I think that's something about when you watch animals and learn from them. Nancy is an artist. You always say you need to get out and to the wild, right, to see them so that you can see what their regular habits are. But even reading your book Humanimal, I'm seeing that animals are changing to our lifestyle in a way, and getting used to even using cars to open nuts and crush nuts to eat.
Well, isn't it amazing? I mean, we're changing the world. We've changed it so much from an animal's perspective. Some of them managed to adapt. And like, for example, that amazing story of crows that will use traffic junctions and then take a nut and place it in front of a car wheel when the traffic light is red, wait for it to turn green, and then the car runs over the nut, breaks it, of course, in the process. Down comes the crow and picks up the cracked nut and eats it, using cars as nutcrackers. I mean, how amazing is that as a form of intelligent adaptation? But of course, not all animals are able to adapt in such ways, and the proliferation of human beings, nearly 8 billion of us now on the planet Earth, has led to tremendous disruption for most other species. But for some, they've managed to adapt and will thrive. But we have to be, I think, within this book, Humanimal is trying to help people understand that the links between species are so much more important in many ways than the differences. And whether for religious reasons or for scientific reasons, for hundreds of years, we've always thought of ourselves as being special and apart and different and exceptional. And I think the scientific research is it's moving the other way. It's showing us that actually our nerve endings are just the same as fish. And if fish are given a certain type of drug to stop them having a panic, it will have the same effect as if we're given certain, beta blockers or antidepressants, because actually the structure and the behavior of our nerves are almost identical, because of course we evolved from fish over hundreds of millions. We're terrestrial fish. We've adapted to living on the land. That's why we have wrists and ankles, so we can do a press up, because when the first amphibians came out of the sea, they had to push themselves up to move around, because they couldn't rely on the buoyancy of the water to keep them up. So they had to have joints in their fins. And sometimes I say to kids in schools, just show me your wrists, and we all just look at our wrists and say, yeah, that's your inner fish. That's the structure of your body that links you through 400 million years of adaptation through natural history. And so
I
we're
knew
all
I used to be a mermaid.
That's it. Yes, that is brilliant. Thank you, Nancy.
Nancy's, as soon as we got the book in here today, we're in Yuma, Arizona. We travel full time on our Love Your Park store. So wildlife is a big deal. But as soon as the book came into the hotel, Nancy grabbed it, ran to her hotel room, and she, I had to fight with her to get it. but this is interesting, going from, absolutely everything and so much history. I mean, you really put history in perspective for me. We talked about, the chart of the world, and you put it in one book, and using the illustrations. What led you to say, okay, we're going to, look at animals and the connection between humans and animals? Was it to get us to understand so that we care for them more, or have you always had, cared about animals?
Well, both of those things, but I think more fundamentally, I suppose, is I'm always interested in a more holistic perspective. And absolutely everything is the story of the history of the world from the beginning of time to the present day. And it starts off with all nature, of course. Mm-hmm. There's no humans at all. We're real latecomers into the show. And when you do meet humans or human ancestors, it's in Africa again. And we're just one other species amongst millions of others. There's no kind of cultural or national division or anything else like that. And so the link between nature and then ultimately, as history plays out over the last few thousand years, human culture, the link between that and nature is fundamental to the story. Often kids, when they're studying history at school, they're only looking at people, and they're looking at the last few hundred years, and you might be forgiven for thinking it's got nothing to do with the natural world, but you'd be completely wrong. And so I think this division between different subjects at schools needs to be demolished. And I think divisions between what it means to be human and what it means to be non-human also needs to be demolished, which is why the word humanimal I thought was appropriate for this book. And what I thought was, what I'll do is how special are humans? I mean, when you've read absolutely everything, you kind of end it thinking, how special are we? Have we messed everything up? Are we really that clever? Would the world be suffering these ecological crises if we were that smart? Let's just see what things most people think make humans different and special. So I divided this book into three. The first section is about being sociable, because we have to be sociable. We love working in teams. We live together in societies, in groups, in cities, and families, and villages. The second piece is feelings. If you look at the plays of William Shakespeare, it's all about how our feelings play out in the theater of life. And then finally, intelligence. People think, well, we're the most special because we're the most intelligent. We use tools, we solve puzzles, all that kind of stuff. So I thought, let me take those three things. Let's look at living as a group. Let's look at feelings. Let's look at intelligence and see how prolific they are in the non-human world. And I was just bowled over by the number of examples of incredible ways that animals are just like us, which is the subtitle of the book. So I thought, well, I'm not really a human, and they're not really an animal. We're all humanimals. And then we can see the links, and by changing the language, maybe we can change the way we think. And in fact, there was a very famous journalist who's a real sort of hero of mine called George Orwell, who wrote a famous book. And there's one essay I would encourage any of your listeners to read. It's called Politics in the English Language. And it's very simply about how if we change the language, we can change behavior, we can change thinking. Unfortunately, of course, you can change it for the worse. And that is happening, I think, in some parts of the world at the moment. But you can change people's behavior for the better too through language and using it in a way that makes people thoughtful and mindful. And I'm hoping the title of this book, Humanimal, plays a little part in that.
I agree. And when you talk about bees voting, I didn't know that. I mean, but then Nancy, haven't you watched that with animals where there's like the hierarchy, and like even with lions? I remember watching lions with you, and how
Mm-hmm.
it's almost like a regular family who gets the food first. Isn't that kind
Oh,
of?
absolutely. You
Mm-hmm.
know, they've got their hierarchy within each of the prides. And then when one pride comes up against another one, you're never really sure. Are they going to fight?
Yeah.
Or are they going to mingle? And it's interesting, you know, especially, Lisa, do you remember the wildebeest got all confused? Two herds of wildebeest got all confused, and they were racing around, and dust was flying, and they're all mooing like cows. And then one by one, they separated off, except for one baby. So you had the two herds now divided, with one baby sitting in the middle who didn't seem to know which side to go to. And we watched, it was, you know, and finally two of the, on the one side, two wildebeest came out and said, this is our baby and we're taking her back here. Mm-hmm. And then she walked back with them. So, and the other herd just stood and watched, and they're all stamping their feet. So it's kind of like, you know, if you watch long enough, and I think that's the key to watching nature, you have to watch a long time to see the full story. Mm-hmm. Because if you just drive, take your photos, and move on, you miss the whole theater.
And that's why, I mean, for this book, I've been working. I mean, I shouldn't really take the credit for this at all, because at the back of the book, I list about 14 different scientists I've been working with on these stories, making sure that they're absolutely accurate, of course. But these are the people who've spent months and years studying particular animal behavior. And as Nancy says, that's what it takes. And, you know, if you think of Jane Goodall, who's the classic example, really, with chimpanzees, you know, she just lived with them. And when you do that, your perspective completely changes, and your perspective about yourself too. I think that's the other factor here, and that, you know, I think that all of these experts, it's impossible to speak to somebody who's an expert in all different animals, because our culture tends towards specialization, and to have authenticity, you have to specialize. But if you want to bring these stories together and make them accessible to younger people, we need to bring them the science as well as the story.
Yes. Yeah, the science is key. And I think that's really important that you put all these scientists in there, and wildlife advocates. I mean, what they've done, because our society seems to be forgetting the importance of science, and science is almost a scary word. It almost means like, oh, we have to use our brain to understand science, or to even listen to the scientists. And that's to me a crucial thing, that we listen and learn from these people that is what they're doing all day long, like you're saying, and they're living it. Whereas, you know, it's like, you know, if you're going to, you know, look at what's going on with the planet, with climate change, global warming, there, I said it, everybody, get in trouble, you know. But if we don't listen to the scientists, it's like not taking your car to a mechanic who specializes in fixing the problem you have.
Yeah, no, wouldn't that be crazy? Or you go to somebody, you know, you go to a dentist because they're good at, you know, sorting your teeth out, because they know what they're doing.
Oh, you went dentist. Now that's scary.
that is scary.
Yeah, right. So, you know, I think you're absolutely right. And you shouldn't be afraid at all about mentioning global warming. I don't think. There's always been climate change. You know, that's why writing absolutely everything, to me, is so important. To the climate has always been changing. It's a dynamic system that we live in. And, you know, one change over here will have an effect over there. And that change may not be utterly predictable. And we, you know, because it's so dynamic, we need to be attentive. We need to be open-minded. We need to be adaptable. We need to be listening. We need to be able to change our perspectives and our behaviors to suit. And if we can instill some of that thinking for younger people, they will be able to pick up the pieces of the mess that you know, is lying around us at the moment when it comes to.
You know, it does no good to pretend that it's not happening. And I think we get stuck on who's to blame instead of, okay, no matter what, we need to fix it. And there are scientists who are making suggestions on what we need to do in order to fix it. Instead of saying who caused it, let's just fix it. And yes, that means we have to do that horrible thing, change.
Oh, yeah. And there's something that I really want to touch on when you talk about these connections. When you read Humanimal, And I love the pictures, by the way. The illustrations
Yeah.
are fabulous, just like in
Right.
absolutely everything.
Uh-huh.
And it's to me, this is like a book all families, all ages need to
Yep.
get into. Um, what's interesting is when you talk about everything's connected. I mean, that's why we're a big blend, right? Because we realize that if you're into gardening, you're going to be into nature, and if
Yes.
you're into gardening, you're going to want good food. So it's all connected. But
Yeah.
what's interesting is what I think connects everything is this communication, and that seems to be no matter what section of the book we're reading. It's like, okay, the bees vote, and there's communication in that. It's like, how do the hierarchy, the orders. When it comes to grief, there's communication. There's the communication, the sounds, the language, like what you're talking about, whales and chickens.
Yes.
But everything, even the deception, that is still a form of communication.
Oh, absolutely. A really important one. You're quite right. And communication is the link. It's the inextricable links that there are in this dynamic system. Everything is impacting on everything else. You can't think of anything in isolation. There are no silos. That is not the way nature works, and we are part of nature. So I guess what I'm also trying to say is that let's think of the language that way too. We're very in our modern culture, we're very inclined to put things in boxes and put labels on them. And of course, that can stop that communication from flowing. Experts, even scientists, will wrap their subject with a special language that precludes other people from getting in. That can happen very easily, not through anybody's fault, but it just seems to be, what can happen. And therefore, the idea of this is to break that down and make it very visual, to make it accessible to young people, and to make it detailed enough so that young people can find out things that their parents and grandparents and teachers don't know. And it's amazing to me what happens when a young person reads something and tells an adult, so did you know that bees vote? And they said, no. You didn't know, or you didn't know that, whales, grieve when their calves die, or did you know that, an elephant passes the mirror test? You don't know what the mirror test is. And then the kid explains it. And when they do that, they're communicating with confidence. They're communicating with passion. They're communicating with a love of the subject. And, to me, that is really fundamental to trying to help the next generation, empathize with others. And it's all communication, as you say, Lisa.
It is.
For when I was in school, the scientists were working really hard to divorce emotions from learning, and that animals cannot possibly share the same kind of emotions that we do as humans. And I always really had a problem with it, because everything I ever saw in the animal world, it seemed to me they have exactly the same emotions and for the same reasons. And yet the teachers would say, no, what was the name for that?
Anthropomorphizing.
Yes, yeah. And they would, no.
Word, right?
Yeah. And I was like, but you can see, like, when a dog is happy, they run around in circles, and they're wagging their tail, and they're panting, and they're jumping up on things, and you can see that's different than when they're stalking to hunt. You can see the difference. And so why, if you could see the difference, why can't you feel,
But they do. And what's a relief is that there's so much scientific research now that's backing up your intuition and a child's intuition. That the nerve endings of fish use the same mechanics for sending messages as ours, which isn't surprising given that we're adapted from fish anyway. And if they get drugs to stop a panic attack, it'll be the same effect as if we're given drugs to stop a panic attack. And so I think that and another a great example that I discovered was how they've diagnosed that baboons grieve when close family members die. It's the level of cortisol they found in their feces or their poop, and this is much more accentuated whenever a close relative or family member dies than if it happens in another troop or somewhere else. So the same idea that the feelings that we have, these emotions that are also triggered by hormones, of course, the same ones are happening in other creatures. They're being, coursing through their veins in the same way that they do with us, which of course is no surprise when you think our DNA is 99% of the same as our closest relatives anyway in the animal world. So I think this I think this cabal between traditional religious perspectives that divide humans from the natural world and scientists who perhaps have not wanted to think about animals experiencing feelings because, of course, we use animals in scientific experiments and we don't want to think about the animals that are being farmed for our food. And it's more convenient for us to pretend that we're different, we can feel, and what evidence is that animals can feel, because we're not animals, so we can't prove that they feel. That's not good enough anymore.
There was some guy, pre-Shakespeare times, some dude said, and this is what, I can't remember. I wish I wish I had written it down, but I remember watching a documentary or something, and there was this dude, and he said animals don't have feelings like human beings, and the whole thing about fish don't feel and reptiles don't feel.
You're thinking of Descartes, I think, perhaps. He was the French philosopher, I think, therefore I am. And he was trying to say that the rest of the universe, apart from me, is a machine. And that, at that time, they were beginning to realize that you could predict where planets were from one moment to the next, Galileo with the laws of motion. And surely it's the same with animals. They're just parts of this elaborate machine. And if we learn how to operate this machine, then we can control nature. That is an arrogance that's been there since the Renaissance. We're just beginning perhaps to find a new narrative now, which is going to be really important for the future.
And when we were in Kenya, I saw this vervet monkey holding her baby, and she was rocking it back and forth. And it was obvious to me that she was really unhappy. And I watched it, like 2-3 hours later, she finally put the baby down on the ground, and it was still. So I thought, this baby's dead. She went back up in the tree, but she's looking at it. And I walked over. She came down the tree, and my first thought was, she's going to bite me. But I stood where I was. I knelt down, and she came and she sat right next to me. I put a leaf there by her. She put the leaf on the baby. She tapped my hand. Then she went back up the tree. So I cannot say that animals don't grieve and they don't feel like we do. I just had too many incidences of things like that where I've seen animals act exactly like humans.
Yeah. And it just would be so unscientific for evolution to have created a species that isn't somehow similar or a product of the other species that it has evolved from. I mean, it doesn't make sense. So I think but there is enough science now that is, putting this 20th century anthropomorphic myth, into history. And I think hopefully this book, Humanimal, and the title of the book, Humanimal,
I love it,
can be just a little part of that, so that younger people and their parents and grandparents can feel a sense of confidence about how they intuitively feel about the natural world, which
we're connected to. And I wanted to know what your research for this. Did you come across research in regards to us being connected with plants? Because I've been reading some studies that we do share some genetics with trees. And so I was wondering if you've seen any of that information while you were doing this.
Absolutely. And funnily enough, one thing I could have done is to try and, extend this concept further into all living things. I mean, there's something like 40% of our DNA is the same as a banana. Would you believe that?
Wow.
That's one for the next cocktail party.
That's funny.
But there is a tremendous amount of commonality with plants as well as with animals, and even with fungi too. And fungi are closer to animals than they are to plants, as it happens. And of course, you've got to remember there are some animals that you think are plants, like a sponge is an animal. It's not a plant. And so when you start, I think, connecting into the deep narrative of nature, then all these classifications that are Victorian constructs, really, that have become fossilized in language, they all need to be broken down. Genetics does that, actually. I mean, that's a wonderful thing about it. It'll give you a percentage, really, of differentiation rather than a word. And, that's a better, yardstick, I think. And we're 99% the same as a chimpanzee when it comes to DNA. That doesn't mean to say that we don't have our own specialities, and we don't have things that make us different. But my goodness, we have a whole lot more in common than we have in difference.
What is coral then? If a sponge is an animal, and you've got the
Oh,
dolphins
oh,
that use the sponge on their nose when they go out hunting,
yes.
so they don't get hurt. The coral, but and this is what's interesting: different species working together, like the
Yeah,
remora fish on the back of a shark.
yeah,
That to me has always been mind blowing. Like how mistletoe goes up a tree and it helps this plant or this bird over here, but sometimes it can strangle a tree. So there's these. It just is an interesting to me when you see creatures and living things work together where normally you'd think they'd be, the remora fish should be scared of the shark, but they have a
I
they
think
have a relationship.
they do. It's a system. We're all within this biosphere, this ecosystem, and I think, if you go back to that amazing photograph of Earthrise that was only taken 60 years ago, we are the only species that's ever seen the whole planet, rise up in space.
Mm.
Most species have seen sunrise and they see moonrise, but humans are the only species that have been out onto the moon and watched the planet rise
Mm.
up in the void of space. And I think that is special. That does give us a uniqueness in terms of our consciousness about the whole system that we are a part of. And we need to use that wisely and constructively to try and restore the health and balance of that overall system if we possibly can. And if we can do that by making available visually attractive stories for younger people, and then they can find out about things and then tell the adults in their lives about them, then that's all great. That's why I do what I do.
Mm. But is coral related to a sponge then, or
It's an animal, of
it's an
course.
animal?
Mhm.
Yes, yes,
Oh,
yes.
that's
Just
right.
it
Yeah.
secretes, the coral, the reef is the sort of the dead coral, and what it's trying to do is to live, build up this reef so it can be near the surface of the water, so that it can use the sunlight, and then it can have its symbiotic relationship with algae to create the unique environment of a coral reef, which is
Mm.
so healthy for so many different species to inhabit.
Have you seen that they want to mine at the bottom of the ocean, like way, way down? They find these
Uh-oh.
that yeah, they're harvesting. That's what they say, not mining.
Mm.
Um,
Yes.
these
Mm.
things, these like it's basically it could it's fossil fuels, but like these little rocks of I don't know, petrified oil or something, way, 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 way down. Yet, so it sounds really cool, biologically good, environmentally. However, then here's this cool octopus that nobody knew about, and there's these cool different species under there. So by them going down, now there's a war on that.
Right.
It's interesting how we keep finding things, but we need to still have that balance.
Well,
One
and
octopus.
there's no actual answers. I don't believe in answers. Somebody
Mm,
was asking me this the other day. Answers are a kind of way station on a journey. Every time you find an answer, it's a corner in the road, and you look
Mm.
around it, you see a whole new view. So the idea that something is right or wrong, or answered
mm,
or not answered, is that lives in the world of fiction in my mind, not nonfiction.
mm.
So I think exploring these things, discovering more, it's all part of the great kind of wonder that we need to keep about the world around us. And nothing is ordinary.
Right.
Everything's amazing.
Right, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, number one, for writing and doing all these amazing, just books that you put out. There's, I think, over 15, 16 books now that you've written, and just created all this information for us to soak up. And you're right, it is like a little cocktail party trivia and trivia for kids to go to school. Like, I know this, nanny. Um,
Yeah, I know.
Everyone, again, the book is Humanimal, Incredible Ways Animals Are Just Like Us. It is out through Christopher-Lloyd is the author. You can go to his website, whatonearthbooks.com, also Amazon, all those great places. But I always say go right to the website too. And we want to thank
Or
our...
maybe, Lisa, to your independent bookstore, because I'm a great fan of booksellers and people who have bookshops, are very passionate
Absolutely.
about stories and young people. And if you have the chance to visit your local bookstore, please do that. If you can't, then of course it's only a click away. But
Books,
I
I'm
think,
with you.
yeah,
Yeah, they're a
Mm.
dying shop. We need to
well,
keep bookstores and record shops open, and
Absolutely.
candy stores too. Just
Yeah.
oh, very good. Good plan.
we gotta, they need to join together and it'll be perfect. Everyone, we want to thank our sponsors, nature photographer Margot Carrera. You can shop on her website, artgallery.com. There it is, support artists. and instead of, okay, let me just stop right there. Just support independent artists. So CarreraFineArtGallery.com, beautiful scarves and paintings and photography. So really nature-inspired gifts. And don't forget, keep up with us at BigBlendRadio.com. We air Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday. So BigBlendRadio.com is a place to go. And we're in all kinds of outlets, from Blog Talk Radio to iHeart Radio to Spotify, YouTube, iTunes, all of those places. And we'd like to close with a song. We thought this one, because it is nature-inspired, it's called Uncle Remus Tales. It's from the Tall Men Group, and you can keep up with them on CD Baby or tallmengroup.weebly. It's off of their album Too Tall. Thank you so much for joining us, Chris.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you. Lovely to thank Nancy, and congratulations with your show.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.
Take care.
He come home from work, I was already in bed. Mama fixed him a plate, I'd stay awake, 'cause I knew once he was fed, he'd climb them stairs, open the door to my room. With a pat on the head, he'd sit on the edge and read me a story or two about Brother Bear and Mr. Cricket. Old Brer Rabbit loved jumping in the thicket, and brave King Lion saving Sister Cow. They lived together in them woods somehow, and every time without fail, off into dreamland I'd sail, with Daddy reading them Uncle Remus tales. Now that old storyteller, he lived in a cabin in the South, with a corncob pipe bouncing just right. Stories flowed with the smoke from his mouth, and Daddy would read them just the way they was written. Damn creatures came alive at my bedside, sometimes scared me a bit, like when Sister Fox met Swamp Gator. That gizzard eater nearly ate her. Don't be frightened now, Brother Frog, you'll be safe in that old hollow log. And every time, without fail, off into dreamland I'd sail, with Daddy reading them Uncle Remus tales. Now I come home from work, my boy's never asleep. I fix me a plate, climb them stairs, into his room I will peek. Him and his friends are playing them video games. I shake my head, shut the door, think to myself what a shame for poor Brother Bear and Mr. Cricket. Nobody cares, Brer Rabbit's in the thicket, or brave King Lion saving Sister Cow. Wish my daddy would read me one now, like when Sister Fox met Swamp Gator. Man, that gizzard eater nearly ate her, and every time without fail, off into dreamland I'd sail. With my daddy reading them Uncle Remus tales. Some nights we'd both fall asleep to them Uncle Remus tales.